A lot of YouTube tutorials are designed to show you how to do one thing quick and dirty. And those do have their place, but I think there's a shortage of content that focuses on taking things all the way as if you were working on a commercial game. So that's why I started the How Do Real Games Handle It series. This series specifically focuses on taking things above and beyond what you would do for a game jam game. And in this episode, we're dealing with scrolling UI. I actually put this tutorial together so that I could turn right around and put it into my game Samarado right after. So let me show you what you'll make from scratch by the end of this video. I'm using this for a shop system, but it could very easily be repurposed for anything UI based where you need to be scrolling. The scroll bar size is going to change dynamically based on how much content you put in. I'll show you how to very easily add custom animations when you select things with your UI. You can see with the cards here, they're smoothly scaling up and down. We can use our mouse to scroll up and down, and we can also use our keyboard or gamepad to select anything we want. And if we select something that's out of view, it's going to auto scroll there. But with a system like this, you'll often end up fighting with the mouse in terms of auto scrolling. So I'm going to show you how to avoid that. So we're making a nice, clean, scrollable UI panel that works with multiple control schemes and works intuitively the way you would expect from a proper commercial game. Ready? Let's go. So we're starting completely from scratch here. So I'm going to create an empty game object called menu, and under that, I'm going to create a new scroll view. That's going to bring up this ugly little box here. And for mine, I don't want horizontal in here, but if you do, you can still follow along with this because everything we make should work fine if you want to leave that in there. So I'm just going to delete this scroll bar right out. And now I just want to tweak a couple of settings in the scroll view game object. We want to set this horizontal scroll bar to none, and you can just click it and hit delete and uncheck this horizontal checkbox. I'm also going to change the width and height to something a little bit bigger. All right, so that we can understand the rest of this a little bit better, I want to add some content in here real quick, and then we'll come back to these settings. So in the content, I want to lay out some cards in a grid pattern. So let's add a grid layout group component. And to get that looking right, let's just add an image as a child and then duplicate it a couple of times. And first, I'm just going to size them and space them apart and add some graphics in here. And I got these cards off the asset store for free. Link is in the description if you want them. All right, awesome. So go back to the scroll rect and change the visibility to auto hide, meaning if the content here goes outside the viewport, only then do we need a scroll bar. Otherwise, it's going to hide, right? And if we hit play, we can see it's hiding. Good. But you can see if we add enough cards in here and we hit play, the scroll bar still isn't showing. Why not? And that's because the scroll bar is literally dependent on the size of this rectangle in the content game object. And right now it's not resizing by itself. So to fix that, let's add a content size fitter component and change the vertical fit to preferred size. Now you can see the content rectangle has expanded appropriately, and even if we add more cards, it's going to continue expanding by itself. And I'm just going to darken this area here so that the scroll bar is easier for you guys to see. And if we hit play, you can see the scroll bar is the right size. And we can use our mouse to scroll up and down, but it's very slow, and you can kind of scroll beyond the boundaries, which I don't want either. So back in scroll view, elastic is what's letting us go beyond the boundaries, so clamped is what I want here. I'm also going to change the scroll sensitivity to 10, and I'm going to get rid of inertia. And you can just play around with these settings until you get the right feel for your game. Okay, so we have our scrollable area, and the scroll bar is going to dynamically change size like we want. Now let's get these images behaving like buttons and get some custom animations playing on them when we select them. You can make anything behave like a button by adding a button component. And make sure it's a raycast target or it won't be detected by your mouse. Now I'm going to darken the normal color just a bit and make the selected color full white. And you can see it's already looking pretty good, and we can click it like a button, and we have an on-click event here that lets us assign functions when we select it. So if I'm using this for a shop, then this is where I'd plug in the actual buy function and hook all of that up with this event. But I want to focus on how to get this animating a bit. So I'm just going to change the highlight color to blue just for a sec. So the behavior I'm looking for is when the mouse hovers over one of the cards, that card is selected. All I have to do is press enter or click it or whatever. But right now, the mouse isn't selecting the card, it's highlighting the card. We want to bypass that entirely. And we can do that with interfaces from the Selectable class. And it's really easy to do. So we're going to create a class called onButtonSelected. And we're going to attach it to our card and open that up. So to get access to those interfaces, we'll need to add the UnityEngine.EventSystems namespace at the top. And after mono behavior, let's add the IPointerEnterHandler and IPointerExitHandler interfaces. And interfaces have to inherit their members. That's why we have an error. So we can just right click, quick actions and refactoring, and implement those interfaces. So on pointer means on mouse, right? So this is similar to on trigger enter, and this is like on trigger exit, except it's for UI detecting when the mouse specifically has entered or exited that object that this script is attached to. So what do we want to do when the mouse enters the card? We want to select the card, and we do that by making the event data's selected object this game object. And when we deselect the card, we're going to null that out. And you can see, even though we still have blue on the highlight color, it goes right to the select color when we hover over it. Awesome. So how do we add an animation to the card? I'd like to pop the scale slightly, and I want to do it smoothly. And I recommend using the animation here very sparingly. A little bit is okay, but honestly, there is a much more performant and much easier way to do what we want, and that is with a tweening library. And if you're not using a tweening library, you are doing yourself a disservice because they are really awesome and they're easy to use. I recommend DoTween. I use their free version. It's great and it still gets updates so you know that it's current and it's safe, but there are lots of libraries and they all work very similarly and there are lots of great free ones. So once you have one installed, I'll show you using DoTween how we can actually animate this card, but obviously you can add whatever kind of effect you want. The only question is, where do we do it? There's no onSelect event on the button component. And again, that's where the selectable interfaces will come in. So back in our onButtonSelected script, let's add an ISelectHandler and IDeselectHandler interface and implement those as well. So basically when we select, we want to play an animation, and same with the deselect. And we'll need to add the dg.tweening namespace at the top so that we can say transform.doScale. Type in the scale you want it to jump to and how long you want that transition to be. You can also set the easing. You can pass in your own animation curve here if you want, or you can use a list of presets. Anyways, on deselect, we're going to bring it back to 1 over the same amount of time, or however much time you want. And now we have it animating. Awesome. Next, let's make it so that we can scroll around using our keyboard or gamepad. So we need to create a script called menu controller for that. Also, if this were a shop system or whatever, I wouldn't have it based on a predetermined number of cards that are already in the UI. I would probably generate them at runtime based on a list probably. And we'd also open it based on an event like a button press or you're talking to the shopkeeper or whatever. So I'm just going to make it so that this opens when we press the M key on the keyboard. So I'm just going to add this functionality in really quick. But basically when we start the game, the canvas is turned off, and whenever we press the M key, it's going to toggle the menu, which opens it or closes it and keeps track of all that using a bool. And if we haven't spawned the cards yet, then spawn the cards. And all that's going to do is loop through a predetermined number of times, spawn in a card as a child of the content game object, adds it to a list that we're keeping track of, and this part's really important, okay? If it's the first item in the loop, meaning the top left card, we're going to select it, okay? That's the most important part here. So I'm going to make this a prefab and assign everything in the inspector. And now if we press play, we can see our first card automatically gets selected even without the mouse, and we can already use our keyboard or our gamepad to be able to scroll around. That is all being handled from the event system, which has a default input action asset here. You can obviously, of course, make your own and plug that in there if you want. Now, our next problem is we can scroll around, but if I highlight anything with my mouse and then remove my mouse, it's now nulling out our selected object, and now our keyboard and gamepad stop working. So we're going to need to keep track of a few things to correct this. We're going to need to track our last card selected and the last selected index. So back in our onButtonSelected, our last card selected is going to be this game object. And to grab the index, we're going to need to loop through the list of cards. And if that iteration is this game object, then assign the index and return since we don't need to finish the rest of that loop. So now, even when our card isn't selected, we've stored what it was. So now we can tell it what to do when we move right, left, up, or down. And we're only going to run anything in there if our current selected game object is null, but our last card selected is not null. So the X's and the Y's are going to be handled a little bit differently, so let's handle the X's first. I'm going to create a function for handling our next card selection, and what we'll do is calculate the addition amount. So it's going to be our last selected index plus whatever that addition is. And we're going to select the card of whatever that index will be. So if we highlight this one here and then deselect it and I press left, I want this one to be selected and vice versa, right? Up, down, left, right, we want it all to be intuitive. But we also don't want to do anything if the new index is less than 0 because that's going to give us an error. So if it's less than 0, just set it to the last selected card. Otherwise, if it's not, then set it to the new index. So before we can calculate X, we're going to need to be able to easily access the number of rows and columns in our grid. So I'm going to put a link in the description below to a helper class posted by Serg. This isn't mine, I found it online, but it's really awesome and you might want to add it to your library, so I suggest you nab it and just hold on to it. Okay, now after we've done that, let's get a reference to our grid layout group. And after that, we can just create a count of type vector2 int, which is just a vector2 with ints instead of floats, and use that helper function to get it. And if we're pressing right, there are two cases. One is, what do we do if we're at the last card in the row? I don't really want to go to the next card in the array when I press right. That's not intuitive. We don't want to go from card 3 to card 4. That's going to change rows and it's going to feel really weird. So I want to say if our last selected index modulo count.x is equal to count.x minus 1. The modulo returns the remainder of the division of this divided by this. So basically, this is a good way to tell if it is in fact the last card in the row. If it is, we'll return 0, meaning we're not going to go anywhere. Otherwise, we'll iterate by 1. Similar thing for going left. This will let us know if we're at the leftmost card in the row. And if we are, we don't want to move, so we'll just return 0. Otherwise, we'll return minus 1 so that it moves left. Okay? So up here, we'll calculate our addition amount and then plug that into our handle next card selection. And the Y is going to be similar, except hopefully a little less confusing. If we're going up, we want to return 0 if the last selected card minus the count of the number of cards per row is less than 0. Otherwise, return the count of our row as a negative since we're moving up. And if we're moving down, we want to return 0, meaning don't move, if the last selected card plus the row count is greater than the number of cards in your list. Otherwise, we're going to add the number of cards from the row so that we move down by that amount. And we're going to plug that in over here. Awesome, so let's plug in our grid layout group reference. And now we should be able to use our mouse or our keyboard or gamepad. And even if we deselect something with our mouse, depending on what we press, it should just pick the intuitive choice. Now finally, let's get this thing auto-scrolling, because you can see if we select cards down here, we want it to auto-scroll to them, but that is not a built-in functionality. We're going to have to grab some code to do that for us. And one more time, I'm going to post a link in the description below. We are not going to reinvent the wheel here. That would make this tutorial way too long. There are already really good solutions out there that are battle tested. So big shout out here to 03 Growlith for this script. It's really great. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I'm going to nab that and throw it into my project. And all you got to do is add it to your scrollView game object and it should just work. I'm going to change the scroll speed to 50 and change it to vertical. And boom, there you go. Now there are two little things. It scrolls up way too fast and it doesn't go all the way to the bottom. And this is because it's not taking our padding into account. So up here, I'm going to add a Y padding variable. And I also revised the update vertical scroll position method. Pause it if you want these changes. This incorporates the Y padding as well as changes to the scrolling a bit so that it's just a little bit less jarring on the way up. And there you can see that's working nicely and our padding was 20 exactly. So with that in the inspector, it now auto scrolls to the bottom perfectly. But there is one huge problem with this now that we've implemented the auto scrolling: the mouse. As soon as my mouse enters the picture, this thing starts auto scrolling all over the place. So there's a couple of things we need to do, but they're pretty quick. In this script we just grabbed, let's add an or cursor.lockState is equal to cursor.lockMode.none. Meaning, if the mouse is not locked, we are returning and not auto-scrolling. So if we're using the mouse, we're not going to auto-scroll. So how are we going to lock the mouse? Well, let's create a script called cursor visibility and attach it to our menu. So we're either going to hide the cursor and lock it, or we're going to show the cursor and unlock it. We'll hide it if the menu is open and we've moved on the gamepad or keyboard like we said. My move input is reading from a vector2 control type using the keyboard and gamepad, as you can see. And actually, while we're here, we're going to need to add the mouse position. Make it a value of type vector2. We're going to grab the position and make sure that you add the mouse to your keyboard and mouse control scheme if you have control schemes set up. And I'm just going to add that really quick into my user input script. So we get the mouse action and we update it in the update method. It's pretty easy stuff. Now, again, we said we'd unlock the mouse whenever we detected movement on the mouse. How do we do that? Well, let's track our last mouse position and update that at the end of update. And at the beginning of update, after we grab the mouse position, let's check if the current position is different than the last position. And if it is, we'll call an event. So let's set up a delegate void called mouseMovedAction and a static event called onMouseMovedAction. And we'll invoke that in the mouseMovedEvent method. And call that here. Now currently that event won't do anything because there are no methods that have subscribed to it. So let's subscribe the show cursor method in onEnable and be sure to unsubscribe it in onDisable. And that's it. There you go. We're no longer fighting with the mouse. The mouse doesn't always hide in the editor, but in a build, it would be a lot more obvious what's going on there. It's a lot of work to get it working intuitively in the way that you would expect, but I really hope that you found this tutorial helpful. And if you like this kind of content, let me know by hitting the like button and commenting so that this video gets shared more. And my patrons get access to the source files of every tutorial ever made on this channel. So if you want to dig around in here, consider supporting us on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye. I want to give a very special thank you to all of our Hall of Fame patrons: Jakob Yondok, Christopher Nichols, Zondra Kessler, Fontaine Waite, Brainwaves to Binary, Couch, KB at Birdtech Games, Ian Oral, and 60+ Maker, as well as our early access patrons: Ken Waite, Mason Crow, Mr. D, Liquid Egg, Alexander Prestis, Jude Greaves, Felipe Gomez dos Santos, Ober, Francesco Latamata, Bill Guo, Alone on Mars, Alex Friedman, Danny Rathliff, Neil Ben Kerberger, Lucky Tales, Aiden Serve, Adarsh Kumar, Merler, Anastasia Shamalina, and Petr Yurichek. If you choose to support us on Patreon, you can get early access to all of our YouTube videos, monthly alpha builds, and more.